Back from the Fantasy Football Profits. As always, we're excited to have you guys here today for the last start and sit video of the year. Very excited. Of course, it's week 17. That means if you are playing in a fantasy game this week, you are in a championship game. So congratulations. Hopefully you win. Hopefully you have fun. Hopefully you get to beat somebody and rub it in their face a little bit. We know that this video might have a few less views than our typical start and sit because many championships actually happen in week 16 and a lot of leagues are done. However, we'd say if you're watching this and your league is done for whatever reason, I would say stay subscribed. We have a lot going on in the off season. One of those things we have going on in the off season is our playoff contest. This is a free contest, so just go to our playoff contest video on YouTube and submit a lineup, and whoever does the best or the top 10 people who do the best will get free FFP jerseys. Just fun to kind of continue the fantasy season for a little bit longer. We'd also say stay subscribed. In the off season, we're going to be posting lots of videos on the draft, combine numbers, trades, and free agency. So there's a lot going to be going on. We'll also be making improvements. The next thing we're looking at improving is our microphone, actually looking to get some better audio. So without any further ado, we might as well get right into it with the first game.
Yeah, we'll get into the first game once again. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for your input. We're excited for next year. Continue to give us feedback. And before we get into game one here, the one thing that's difficult, week 17 championships are very difficult to navigate. A lot of times veterans may sit or only play half a game. Players that are maybe in the playoffs might rest. So it's trying to figure out who really is going to play is difficult in week 17. So we did our best to give you as much information as possible. But it's Wednesday, and between now and Sunday's games, there'll be more change. We'll try to keep you updated on that. Let's look at game one now. The Packers versus the Lions. Look at the quarterbacks. Brett Hundley plays the Lions, allowed the 13th fewest points to quarterbacks. He's really had two good games here against Pittsburgh and Cleveland. He had very good games, three touchdown passes to no interceptions. Otherwise, if you take away those two games, he's been painfully bad this year. You really can't trust him at this point. You need to stay away from him. I don't care how tempting that might be, especially when you consider the fact that there's a very good likelihood that Adams and Nelson won't be in this game, so I would stay away from him. As far as Matthew Stafford goes in this game, Green Bay allows 11th most points to quarterbacks. He's having a solid year right now, and they're playing at home indoors because right now this time of year weather can be an issue, but for him it won't be. They're going to be playing at home indoors, so there's really no need to sit out. I would start Matthew Stafford. In fact, Lions coach Jim Caldwell said he's given no consideration to resting his starters, so Jim Caldwell makes it sound like they're going to put their best starters out there. They're going to play the entire game at home. Go ahead and start Matthew Stafford in this one. Now, as far as running backs go, you got Jamal Williams, running back for Green Bay in this one. He plays Detroit. Now, Detroit allowed the third most points to running backs, so Detroit is very vulnerable to running backs at this point. He's a guy that you need to play for a lot of reasons. One, I think he's going to get a lot of carries in this game. But the other thing is Aaron Jones had come back a few weeks ago. He's been banged up, beat up. He re-injured his knee last week. He's not expected to play, so that means that a majority of these touches are going to go to Jamal Williams. Go ahead and start him in this game. He's a good play. Now I want to switch it up a little bit. I want to take a look at the Lions running back situation. If I was going to pick a guy in that backfield that I would start this week, it would be Tion Green. Talked about him in our waiver wire video. Now, Tion Green plays the Packers. Now, the Packers allow the fourth most points to running backs. He's had 2 touchdowns in the last 4 games. He's had very solid yards per carry of 4.36. So right now the Lions are officially out of playoff contention, so they're beginning to look to next year, and they begin to evaluate some of their positions and players. And one of the areas that they need to desperately evaluate is the running back position right now. Amir Abdullah is not the answer. He's got, I think, a career low of 3.7 yards per carry. It's just proven over the last couple of years he's not a guy that's going to take that load. He's not a running back with his build and the way he plays. It's going to get 15 to 20 carries a game, and he's not the answer there. Theo Riddick is a good running back, but he's more of a third down back, change of pace back. And so I think what you're going to see in this last game is an opportunity to give Tion Green a considerable amount of carries and looks to see if he's a guy that maybe they could look to next year to fit in there. The last game that they had, they kind of split carries all 3 ways. And of the 3 running backs between Amir, Riddick, and himself, Green played the best in that one. He was by far the best running back of the 3. So he's a guy, if you had to play, I would go Tion Green. I expect him to get 15 to 20 carries in this one. As I previously mentioned, I would not even bother with Amir Abdullah. He's had a total of 65 yards in the last 4 games for 2.71 yards per carry. He's been brutal. Theo Riddick, on the other hand, he would have some value in what we call flex play in PPR leagues. Although even there, he doesn't have high value. If you look at his numbers in the last 6 games, only 2 of those 6 games he's been worth starting at this point. So I would stay away from him also, unless you're very desperate. As far as wideouts in this game goes, let's look at Devontae Adams. No, right now, if he plays in this game and he's questionable, he's in concussion protocol, and it looks like he's not going to play. But if he does play, you need to start him. He's the one player that since Brent Hundley's been a quarterback who's maintained his value, he's done pretty well. So if Adams plays, you need to play him. Most likely he's going to sit, though. As far as Jordy Nelson goes, he's got a shoulder injury. Sounds like he is doubtful. It doesn't matter. Even if he does play, he's a guy that his year came crashing down when Aaron Rodgers got hurt. He hasn't had any value at this point. The guy that you want to look at, really, of all those wideouts, once again, most likely Adams is going to be out, Nelson's not valuable, is Randall Cobb. He's about the only real legitimate wide receiver that's going to be left in the lineup here, and so he has wide receiver 3 appeal this week. You could start him. As far as the wideouts go for Detroit, you got Golden Tate, plays Green Bay, gives up the 11th most points to wide receivers. Now, Golden Tate's had some good games this year, but he's only been over 100 yards twice, and he doesn't get a lot of touchdowns, so his value is mostly in PPR leagues. If you're in a PPR league, you could start Golden Tate. He's got value in there. If not, if you're in a standard league, I would probably sit him. I think this week we're going to see more of Kenny Golladay in this one, the rookie wide receiver who's looked good at times. I expect him to get more targets. You look at Marvin Jones in this one. He had a huge game last time he played Green Bay earlier this year. He went for 7 catches, 170 yards, and 2 TDs. I would actually play Marvin Jones in this game. Kenny Golladay, I think, is going to get more targets, but not enough that we can trust him to start. I would stay away from him. Now let's look at, I would sit Green Bay tight ends. And then Eric Ebron. Eric Ebron's had a very interesting season. Now he plays Green Bay, who's tough against tight ends. They actually allow the 9th fewest points to tight ends. Now the first 6 games of the year, Eric Ebron actually came out and he said, "I'm playing myself out of a job. I love his honesty, his transparency. He's admitting I'm having a brutal year right now. I need to do things differently." Well, he really has turned it around. If you look at the last 6 or 7 games, he's played a lot better. In fact, if you look at the last 3 games, he's averaging 8.67 targets per game, and during that same stretch, he's had 2 touchdowns. So I would expect that he's a fair play in this one. I would start Eric Ebron if you need a tight end. As far as kickers go, I would start Prater, I would sit Crosby, I would sit Green Bay's defense, and I would start Detroit's defense in this one.
Right on to the second game, Texans versus Colts. This is a game that a lot of people I probably wouldn't be starting in this game, but we'll just get right into it. Starting with the quarterbacks, Jacoby Brissett for the Colts. Plays Houston and give up the 2nd most fantasy points to QBs, which is pretty good. We know that Jacoby Brissett hasn't played well all year. However, the last time he played Houston, he threw for 308 yards and 2 touchdowns. So things are certainly looking up that way. Apparently matches up well against them. I would keep in mind, if you have another option, I would probably start him over Brissett, and remind you that Brissett's only thrown 12 touchdown passes all year. That's really bad, pretty unacceptable for a starter. However, if you're desperate, at least is a good matchup. On the other side, I would not start any Houston QB, whoever is in there. Last week, all the Houston QBs combined for just 93 yards and an interception. What a brutal game. Move on to running backs now. Frank Gore. Houston gives up the 6th fewest points to running backs, and Frank Gore only has 3 touchdowns on the season, and he only has one 100-yard game, and even that 100-yard game is far beyond his reach. I believe he got 36 carries that game. It was bad weather. I think it snowed like 1.5 feet when they played Buffalo, and they just weren't throwing the ball. He's not getting anywhere near 36 carries. He usually gets 12 to 17 in that sort of range. So I think it's completely far-fetched to think that he's going to have a good game this game. I'd definitely sit Gore. On the other side, we see Lamar Miller. If you're looking for a guy and you're not sure that this might be a guy to play, obviously it depends on your team, what other running backs you have. But it's kind of the same as Gore. He also only has 3 touchdowns on the season, and he's never broken 100 yards. But plays a defense that gives up the 10th most points to running backs, so that might be a possible play. I don't like it, but you know, when you're desperate, sometimes you're desperate. And one thing that's nice about both of those backs is they're both the sole running back starters, and they don't do much carry splitting, so that's nice. Move on to wide receiver. These are the 2 players that I would confidently start, T.Y. Hilton and DeAndre Hopkins. You should start T.Y. Hilton. He plays Houston. He was the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers. The last time he played Houston, he got 175 yards and 2 TDs. What a big day. I'd have a hard time sitting him on my bench. Another guy, like I mentioned, DeAndre Hopkins. He's a must-start. He has 4 touchdowns in the last 3 games. And he's got 1,300 yards and 13 touchdowns on the season. He's phenomenal this year, the #1 player on that offense for sure, especially since Deshaun Watson is out. I think you definitely have to start him. I wouldn't start any Houston tight ends. None of them show much potential. I might start Jack Doyle. With the tight end position being so thin, there's not a lot of options out there. He is a middle of the line tight end. He's a possible start if needed. I wouldn't necessarily be too particularly excited about him, however. He is one of the main targets for Jacoby Brissett, so he's a guy you could possibly fill in. On to kickers. Adam Vinatieri, he's a good kicker on a terrible offense, and he plays a D that gives it the third most points to kickers. So if you're looking for a kicker this week, Adam Vinatieri might be a good option for you. I would sit Houston's kicker. Finally, I would sit both defenses. They both stink, especially Houston. The last couple of games have had like negative fantasy points. It's pretty terrible. So that's that for that game. Feel confident in wide receivers, and everything else I'd be quite cautious about.
Let's look at the Bears versus the Vikings in this one. Let's look at quarterback Case Keenum. Now, Minnesota will need to win if Carolina wins if they want to hold on to that second seed. So there's incentive for the Vikings to play their starters and to play well. Once again, if they win, they can lock up the number 2 seed. So that's why I'm starting with Case Keenum. Now, he had a quiet game last week. Now, if you watch that Minnesota game versus the Packers, there was really no sense of urgency for the Vikings offense at that point. They didn't really seem to be pushing it downfield, and they really had the game under control. They just they really locked down that Green Bay offense. Brandon Hundley struggled to get the ball past the 50-yard line. I think that's part of the reason why his numbers were down. And so I expect to bounce back this week. Now, he does play Chicago, allows the 7th fewest points to quarterbacks, but I would expect 225 yards and 2 TDs is a pretty safe number for Case Keenum this week. Let's look at Mitch Trubisky. Red, let's just say you need to sit him. He plays the Vikings, who are currently number 1 in the league in points allowed and yardage allowed. The Vikings defense has been very, very solid. And now you add on to that, Mitch Trubisky has struggled as a rookie, so you need to just go ahead and sit him. Don't even consider playing him this week. Now, as far as running backs go in this game, let's look at Jordan Howard of the Bears. Plays Minnesota, allow the fewest points to running backs. He's a very tough matchup. But I think Howard's a guy you still need to start. Here's why. Simply based on talent and volume. One, like you said earlier, it's important that he's not competing. He's going to get a majority of the carries, probably 15 to 20 carries, maybe even more. They're going to want to keep a low score and run the ball. Even with teams loading the box against Jordan Howard and the Bears this year, he still managed 9 touchdowns. He's had over 5 games with over 100 yards rushing. So he's a guy that's not a great play because of his matchup, but he's a good running back. And so I would say he falls to a running back 2 or 3 category this week based on your league size and scoring system. I would sit Tariq Cohen, doesn't matter, just sit him. Now let's look at Jerick McKinnon of the Vikings. So he's playing the Bears, will allow the 9th fewest points to running backs. Now he's been very hit or miss all year long. Look at 4 last 7 games, he's had single-digit points scored. And so it's hard to tell what you can get him. I would consider Jerick McKinnon somebody you could play in a flex position in a PPR league if your league size is over 12 teams. Beyond that, I would sit him. But if you're over 12 teams and it's a PPR league and you have a flex position, then I would consider Jerick McKinnon in this one. Let's look at Latavius Murray. Latavius Murray is probably going to get 15 to 20 carries. That is very attainable. I think that's a very reasonable expectation for him. They're going to run the ball a lot in this one if they can. The problem with it is he struggled this year. His yards per carry, 3.7, have not been impressive. So he's what we would call touchdown dependent. If he gets you a touchdown, that's a bonus. He's a good start. If not, he's not going to do a whole lot. He's not highly active involved in the passing game. So he's a guy that don't even consider if you're in a PPR league. If you're in a standard league, he's what I would call a low play as a running back 2 to 3 in this one. As far as wideouts go in this game, I look at Adam Thielen. The last 2 games he's been really quiet. This guy really came on the scene. For a while there, he was right behind Antonio Brown for total receiving yards. Last 2 games he's been quiet. He had 3 catches, 30 yards. He followed it up with 2 catches for 24 yards. But here's why. This guy's a great wideout, wonderful guy, a great story if you know how he kind of got to where he's at in the NFL. But in both those games where he took a step back and his numbers were down, they crushed the Packers and they crushed the Bengals. And those games got out of control pretty quickly, so they didn't need to throw the ball a lot downfield. They needed to press it in, and so they played pretty conservatively. Now, the one concern I have is that blowout that happened against the Bengals and against the Packers, that could happen this game also playing at home versus the Bears. So we could have the same problem there. Adam Thielen, very good wideout, could be a blowout. They may not need to throw the ball much in the second half. So I would start Adam Thielen. He's too good to sit, but start him as a wide receiver too. Let's look at Stephon Diggs in this one. He's TDs back-to-back weeks. And he's a very talented wide receiver. In fact, if Adam Thielen hadn't emerged to the receiver that he's become, I've always said, and I believe this very strongly, that Stephon Diggs, when healthy and on the field, has wide receiver talent that puts him in the top 15. He really is that talented. With that said, he's still the number 2 wideout on that team in an offense that won't need to throw the ball a lot. So I would say you could start Stephon Diggs as a wide receiver 3 this week. I would sit all Bear wide receivers, don't even consider it. As far as tight ends go, you look at Kyle Rudolph in this game. Now, Kyle has got 8 TDs on the year, so he's a guy that you need to start. But here's the thing: he has very low value in terms he doesn't get a lot of yards, he doesn't a lot of catches. I think his highest yard total been around. I think he had one game he eclipsed 65. Otherwise, it's been below that. And so if you're in a league that gives a lot of points for receptions and weighs yards heavy, definitely bump down the value on him once again. He's a guy that has touchdown dependent. Now, the other thing I would say with him, too, as far as Kyle Rudolph goes, he is questionable, but he is expected to play in this game. I would say to Adam Shaheen, the tight end for Chicago. He's questionable, but the Vikings are good on D. Don't even bother with that one. As far as kickers go, I would sit the Bears kicker. I'd start Forbath for the Vikings. I would sit the Bears defense and definitely start the Vikings defense at home. That crowd's going to be jacked up, pretty excited this week, and so that's what I would do in that game.
All right, now we get to talk about the Patriots versus the Jets. We'll just get rolling. Obviously, Bryce Petty is an absolute sit. If you look at these numbers, he's just brutal. That offense has been terrible since he took over. On the other side, we see Tom Brady. You'd be dumb not to play, or you'd be dumb to sit Tom Brady. He's playing against the 5th worst pass defense in the NFL, so even if you had some questions because he struggled a couple of weeks, he's still Tom Brady and he still has a good matchup. That's an obvious start.
Yeah, and there's incentive for the Packers, or not the Packers, for the Patriots to play well. They want to make sure they stay ahead of Steelers for the #1 seed throughout the playoffs, so there's definitely that incentive.
Yeah, move on to running backs. Dion Lewis with Rex Burkhead out, which we believe he'll be out again this week. He is the main back, and like last week when he was the main back, he got 129 yards and a touchdown. So we were thinking it should be a fairly good week. However, I might consider sitting him because Mike Gillislee last week came in and kind of became the goal line running back. Kind of became like the backup Rex Burkhead. He got a touchdown last week. In fact, he has 5 touchdowns on the season, despite being placed inactive and being very limited in his time. So I would expect the touchdowns to go to Gillislee this week. He's a kind of a sneaky start. Moving on to wideouts, Brandon Cooks. I didn't necessarily like Brandon Cooks that much this week. You never know what you're going to get with him. However, he still had 6 touchdowns and over 1,000 yards on the season, playing against just an average defense. So it's hard not to start him, but he's got a high floor and a low ceiling, so I'd expect him to be a wide receiver 2 or 3 and nothing more. I would sit wide receiver Robbie Anderson since Josh McCown. When Josh McCown was in, Robbie Anderson was a great wide receiver, but since Bryce Petty took over, he's been, fantasy-wise, just terrible. I'd definitely sit him this week. Tight ends, obviously you start Rob Gronkowski. I don't know anyone who's still playing at this point in the season who's questioning starting him, that's for sure. On the other side, I would sit all Jets tight ends, not worth it. Kickers, of course, you have to start Stefan Gostkowski, and I would sit the Jets kicker. And then finally on defenses, I would start New England. I think they're going to tear apart that Jets offense and Bryce Petty, and I would sit the Jets defense.
Let's take a look at the Giants versus the Redskins. Look at Eli Manning. Eli Manning actually kind of indicated now that he might be near the end of his career. He certainly played that way this year. He fell back to earth last game versus Philadelphia. After having a huge game versus Philadelphia last game, he fell back to the earth. Now, if you take away that one huge game versus Philadelphia, the last 4 games, he only had 1 touchdown pass total during those other 4 games, so he's been very brutal. Last time he played Washington, he had 113 yards, no touchdown passes, and an interception. Stay away from Eli Manning. Just sit him in this one. Kirk Cousins in this one. Kirk Cousins actually got a great matchup. Now, he plays the New York Giants that allow the 2nd most points at quarterback, so he's a great play this week, and go ahead and feel comfortable playing Kirk Cousins. I think he's actually a free agent, so you know he's going to want to finish his year strong and do well and put up some good numbers there. Now, let's look at running backs. Let's look at the Washington running backs, Samaje Perine. Now, they play the New York Giants to allow the 7th most points to running backs. Now, he was questionable last week. Everything seemed to indicate he wasn't going to play. He ended up playing, and they ended up leaving a portion of that game as he re-injured himself. He's got an Achilles injury. He's got a groin injury. And so here's what we need to do with this whole situation. He's had 2 good games this year where he's played well. You take away those 2 games, he's struggled, he's beat up, he's injured. Probably the best situation for fantasy owners is that he sits.
Yeah.
Because if he starts, you don't know will he be effective, how many carries will he get. It's a muddy situation. So if he starts, I would just stay away from him totally. But if he sits, that does open up a door for maybe a sleeper play here, which would be Capri Bibbs. Now, if you look at Capri Bibbs, he's had 6 receptions, 75 yards the last 2 games. He's highly used in the passing game. And last year playing for Denver, he had stretches that he played pretty well. He's got a great matchup. So what I'm hoping happens is that Perine sits, and then Bibbs would become a good play for a lot of you owners out there, and that's what I would do if Perine's ends up sitting. You could start Bibbs as a pretty decent, I would say, running back 2 to 3 this week. Let's look at the running backs for the Giants. You got Wayne Gallman. Now he plays Washington, who allowed 7th most points to running backs. I'm sorry, not 7th, 8th most points to running backs. So Gallman is a guy that I would definitely start, especially in PPR leagues as a flex play. He's had 19 receptions the last 3 games. In PPR leagues the last 3 weeks, he's had double-digit points scored, so he's very effective. They're highly used in the passing game. Eli Manning's having a hard time getting the ball downfield, so he checks the ball down a lot to his tight ends, to his running backs. And another thing that's happened is his value's gone up because Darkwa has just disappeared. He was a guy that looked good for a while there, Orleans Darkwa. But the last 2 games, he had 9 carries for 7 yards and 6 carries for 10 yards. So he's really moving out of that lead role, and the guy that's moving into that is Wayne Gallman. So Wayne Gallman's a good play. Sit Darkwa, as we mentioned, not doing well. As far as wide receivers in this game go, let's look at Sterling Shepard. Now, Sterling Shepard plays the Redskins, who allow the 7th fewest points to wide receivers, so they've been pretty stingy to wideouts. Now this week, Shepard is questionable with a neck injury. Even if he does play, he's going to face Josh Norman. Eli Manning has been brutal. All those saying his injury, the matchup against Washington and Norman, and the fact that Eli struggles leads us to say, you know what, he's a very talented second-year wideout, but you got to sit him this week. You just can't take that chance. Go ahead and sit Shepard. Josh Doctson in this game. Let's take a look at the Washington wideouts. So right now they play the New York Giants, who allow 10th most points to wide receivers, and he's got 6 TDs on the year. Now this former first-round pick has really made some progress this year. He's gotten better. He stayed healthy. He's been on the field. Last game he had 13 targets, and I expect the same this week. Washington's not playing for anything in terms of the playoffs go, and so I think they want to continue to develop this young guy, get him some targets, develop him the offense as a look ahead to next year. I would expect that he's going to get double-digit targets this game. Let's look at Jamison Crowder. He's become the Kirk Cousins' #1 wide receiver. Started the year slow for 6 or 7 games. He's really come on. He's led the team in targets and yards the last 6 or 7 games. He's a solid play in this one, but he's not a great play. I would say Crowder falls into a wide receiver 3 category this week. As far as tight ends go in this game, look at Vernon Davis. Well, we know that Reed is now on the IR, and that leaves Vernon Davis really is the go-to guy there in the tight ends. Now he's playing the New York Giants, who allow the most points to tight ends. So Vernon Davis is a great play out there. For all you fantasy people, if you're into daily fantasy, Vernon Davis is a great play out there. Last week he had a touchdown, so definitely start Vernon Davis in this matchup. Let's look at Evan Ingram, the tight end for the Giants. He's having a very good rookie season right now. Now he plays Washington, who allow the 7th most points to tight ends. It's like that word 7 comes up a lot in this whole thing.
Yeah,
7,
it seems
7,
like
7.
it.
So, Evan Ingram's stats for Week 17 remains in question. He had X-rays on his ribs, who were injured, but they were negative. But he did have to leave the game last game after 1 catch. So he injured his ribs left. They were bruised, pretty badly bruised, but not broken. And so he's questionable for this week. If he plays, I would probably start him because he's one of the few weapons that the Giants have. But we've got to remember he's 1 hit away from leaving the game again with those ribs. And ribs are such a difficult position to protect out there. So he's a low-end play as a tight end goes. As far as kickers go, I would sit Rosas. I would start Hopkins. I would sit the New York Giants defense, and I would start Washington's defense in this one. In fact, Washington's defense is one of those that they're over 50% available in leagues, and they're a great play in this game. So start the Redskins defense.
All right, now we get to talk about Cowboys versus Eagles. We'll start off talking about the quarterbacks, as always, Nick Foles. It's difficult. We've seen 2 Nick Foles. The first game he came out as the starter there for the Eagles. He threw 4 touchdowns and he looked great. And we weren't sure, and we said you should sit him the next week. And sure enough, the next week he didn't throw any touchdowns and he looked very bad. So we've kind of seen 2 Nick Foles. I'm going to say that you should sit Nick Foles again. I think that the first game where he had 4 touchdowns was a fluke. I don't think he'll do it again. I think Dallas is going to actually do quite well against the Eagles this week.
Yeah, I think he did have 1 touchdown pass to Jay Ajayi. Was I think that 1 touchdown? But
yeah, he did. Yep. Yeah. On the other side, we talk about Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott is extremely hit or miss, and he doesn't throw for a lot of yards. He's not a 300 passing yard type of quarterback. It doesn't happen very often. So you're not likely to get points from yards quite as much, just touchdowns. Even then, he struggled. Even last game when Elliott came back, not only that, but they played the Eagles, give up the 11th fewest points to QBs. I'm going to have to sit Dak Prescott this week, in my personal opinion. Although I kind of feel like the negative Nancy. I'm not sure there's too many people I trust this week. I feel like I'd choose to sit them all if I could.
Well, I'll tell you what, as I prepared for this and did some studying, all the leagues I've ever been in, all leagues I'm currently in, we have our Super Bowl in week or the championship in week 16. And so this is a whole different animal trying to figure this out. And, I agree with you. If I was playing the championship right now, there's a lot of guys I would not be comfortable with, quite honestly.
Yeah. Move on to the running backs. Obviously, you have to start Ezekiel Elliott. However, I would temper your expectations. He's still Ezekiel Elliott, but he plays the second best run defense, so I think he'll be just fine. You obviously have to start him, but I wouldn't expect anything unbelievable. JRJ on the other side, thinking that he should rest a lot towards the end of the game and that they should give a lot of carries to Corey Clement or LeGarrette Blount. Clement is kind of a risky pick, but we talked about possibly starting him this week if you're looking to take a gamble on a guy, especially a daily fantasy league. He has 4 touchdowns on the season when he gets carries. He's been effective. We'll move on to the wide receivers. Alshon Jeffrey. I would sit Alshon Jeffrey. He didn't get a touchdown last week. He didn't look great. They have no incentive to play well. The Eagles have locked up the #1 spot in the NFC. So I don't imagine that they're going to be playing too hard. Even if they lose, they're probably not going to be trying to do too much to win that game. So I don't think they're going to be throwing the ball a whole lot. On the other side, I see Nelson Aguilar, the second wide receiver there. He's a guy I would start. He should be a good start. He's played well, especially if Jeffrey is limited. They might limit, their #1 wide receiver. I don't think they're going to limit Aguilar because he's kind of a bit down on the depth chart. But for a #2 receiver, he has 8 touchdowns. He gets lots of red zone targets. I think he's a good option. They might limit Jeffrey, but I don't imagine them limiting both wide receivers.
Yeah, I totally agree with your breakdown. I think that's exactly how it's going to play out. But I'd say, if I was Doug Peterson, I would play Nick Foles, and I would play my entire first-string offense. 1, they'd have 2 weeks to rest up, but 2, Nick Foles hasn't had a lot of time with the #1 offense, and I think we saw last game, he struggled a little bit. He did well week 1, but that was against a terrible pass defense. So I think you're right. That's how it's going to play out. If I was Doug Peterson, and obviously I'm not, I would play him. But I'm sure that's not going to happen that way.
Yeah, I can't argue with you. I definitely lean against sitting players week 17, but we see it's pretty common. It happens quite often. Moving on to tight end, Zach Ertz. He's a great tight end. You got to start him, even if he is slightly limited. We don't know how limited he'll be at tight end. Probably not too much. Not until that game is either lost or won in the fourth quarter. Either way, he'll have at least 3 quarters, maybe 4 quarters. Maybe he plays the whole game. He's such a good tight end. I would sit Jason Witten. He just hasn't played great all season. That offense has been struggling. I would start both kickers, Dan Bailey and Jake Elliott. They've both been kicking very well this year, and it should be a good matchup as far as kicking field goals. I would start the Eagles' defense. They've been good all season, and Dallas has obviously struggled quite a bit lately, and I would sit Dallas' defense. Kind of put that simple and short.
Take a look at the Browns versus the Steelers. Look at quarterback Deshaun Kaiser. Well, first of all, the Steelers have incentive to win in this game because if the Steelers win and New England happens to lose, Steelers will get the #1 seed throughout the playoffs. So they have incentive to win. And Kaiser's just simply bad this year. He's got 9 touchdown passes to 21 interceptions. He's been brutal. Steelers defense is good. You need to sit Kaiser. Don't even think about it. I would hope. If you made it this far, you probably have enough sense to know not to play him, obviously, or you wouldn't be this far into the playoffs as you are. As far as Ben Roethlisberger goes, plays the Browns, allow the 5th most points to quarterbacks. Not in the year. He's having a good year. He had 1 bad game where he threw 5 interceptions versus the Jaguars. But beyond that, Ben Roethlisberger has been very good. In fact, in the last 7 games, he's got 18 touchdown passes to only 5 interceptions. And currently, he's second in the league in passing yards behind, I believe it is Tom Brady. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's behind Tom Brady. So you need to start Ben Roethlisberger. Let's go to the running backs. Look at Le'Veon Bell. Now, normally we always say he's a no-brainer. You need to go ahead and start him. Now, last year when they clinched the playoffs, they sat Le'Veon Bell in the last week. So right now, Thompson, what is he going to do? Rest Bell for the playoffs, which they've obviously made, or play Bell and clinch a bye, possibly getting a bye over New England. The other thing that to consider in this one is Le'Veon Bell right now is competing for the rushing title. And if you look at it, it's Todd Gurley, Bell, and Hunt are the 3 that are really competing. The coach came out already and said that Todd Gurley is not going to play. So it really comes down to Bell and Hunt for the rushing title. So do you play Bell, allow him to get the rushing title, make sure that you clinch, give him 2 weeks to rest? That's what I suspect is going to happen. So I'd play Le'Veon Bell in this game. I would feel confident. Now what's probably going to happen in this game is that game's going to be done by midway through the 3rd quarter. So let's hope that Bell in the first 3 quarters has enough statistics to carry you guys, but I think you need to play him this week. Let's look at Isaiah Crowell. Pittsburgh allows the 15th most points to running backs, but right now Isaiah Crowell is questionable with a rib injury and a shoulder injury, making him really untrustworthy at this point, so I'd probably sit him. But a guy that I would start in this one is Duke Johnson. 1, I'm certain that the Browns will be playing from behind. They'll have to throw the ball, and Kaiser just can't hit any wide receivers down the field, so he throws a lot to his running backs. And right now on the year, Duke Johnson has 68 catches, so I think he's a good play, definitely in PPR leagues. He leads the team in reception, receiving yards, and targets, so go ahead and start him. As far as wideouts go, even though Antonio Brown is out, but Juju Smith-Schuster, since he's been out, has played very well. He's had 6 catches, 114 yards. Last week he had 6 catches again for 75 yards and a TD. Go ahead and start Juju. And I would look at starting Matavius Bryant. Playing the Browns will allow the 13th fewest points to wide receiver. He's another one, though, has increased value with Antonio Brown being out. He's a wide receiver 3 play this week. Let's go to Cleveland. Really, at this point, you sit Coleman, and I hate to say this, but you got to sit Josh Gordon, which is terrible because he's looked good when he's gotten opportunity to succeed. He's very talented, but Kaiser's such a bad quarterback. Next year, when they have a new quarterback, and I assume the Browns will have enough sense to either draft one or get one in free agency, you bring a new quarterback in there, and you can mark my words on this. As long as he stays out of trouble, Josh Gordon will be a top 10 wide receiver next year. But as long as Kaiser's that quarterback, you need to sit him. Last 4 weeks, his total yards have continued to drop week after week, and the Steelers' defense is good, so sit Josh Gordon. I would sit Cleveland tight ends, and here's what I would tell you. This is one a lot of people aren't keeping track of. Start Vance McDonald. That's a great play. Vance McDonald is really overtaking the tight end role there. He's kind of leapfrog past Jesse James. Now, if you look at, he's getting a majority of the targets now. 2 of the last 3 weeks, he's had 4 catches for 52 yards, and now he plays the Browns, who allow the second most points to tight ends. So play Vance McDonald in this one. Start Boswell. He's got a good year kicking. I would sit Zane Gonzalez. Sit the Browns defense, but start the Steelers defense in this one.
All right, Panthers Falcons is actually a fairly big matchup, decides quite a bit of things. Move right into the quarterbacks. I think you have to start Matt Ryan this week. Now, a lot of people are expecting him to be a lot better this year, and he's certainly struggled. However, he's playing a just average Carolina pass defense as far as what they give up fantasy-wise. And the Falcons need a win this week, so I think they're going to be going firing on all cylinders, trying to do their best. And remember, he still has Julio Jones. I would start him. I'd also start Cam Newton. He has had 8 touchdowns in the last 4 games, which is good, not great. However, he is the heart of that offense. If Cam Newton plays well, Carolina plays well. And if Cam Newton plays bad, Carolina plays bad. So he's surely going to get lots of quantity. Hopefully he can make some quality out of it. I'd imagine it should be a good week for him.
Yeah, you talking about Matt Ryan, a lot of people are shocked. Last year he had a great year. Some people took him in the first round. The one thing I will say, now, we had some picks wrong, but I thought we did pretty well in our preseason rankings, and you have a chance to see those if you want. Definitely watch our preseason next year. But the one guy that we cautioned everybody in our preseason rankings was Matt Ryan. We actually said we think he's going to fall back to where he was the previous years, and so that's one area where I feel good about that prediction.
Yeah, we'll move on to running backs now. I totally agree with you. Devonta Freeman, here's a confusing one. He's actually struggled all season. He hasn't looked too great. If you look at his numbers, it's been a little bit of a drop-off from most years. However, he is one of the few star backs who's going to be getting a full workload. He's still a good running back. He's still going to be getting a full workload as they need to win this week. 4 last game struggles. He had 3 good games in a row, so he struggled a little bit in the beginning of the year. He struggled last game, but he had a span before last game, 3 games in a row where he played well. I think you definitely have to start him. If he plays well, Atlanta should win that game. On the other side, we talk about Christian McCaffrey, and this is purely situational. If you're in a PPR league, definitely start Christian McCaffrey. If you're in a standard league, I would really caution you to consider it and see. Hopefully, you'll have some other better options. He's really dependent on catching the ball out of the backfield and getting points that way, for sure. Move on to wide receivers. Obviously, you have to start Julio Jones. He's definitely disappointed some people this year. At times, he's definitely played flat. However, he's averaging over 100 yards a game in the last 5 games, and Carolina gives up the 5th most points to wide receivers, so that's kind of a match made in heaven. Devin Funchess. Now, here's a guy that I had a hard time figuring out what to think of him. He started playing very well. However, he has struggled quite a bit the last 2 games. But that was due to some injury struggles, which he seems to be quite fully recovered from. So now that it's a big, important game, he is the #1 option receiver, and he is healthy. He should be back to normal. I would start Devin Funchess as a wide receiver, too. Finally, going into the tight ends, I talk about Greg Olsen and Austin Hooper. I would sit both of them. I think this is a bad matchup for tight ends. Neither of them have had very impressive seasons. Kickers Matt Bryant and Graham Gano. They're both just average starts. Depending on your situation, if you could find better kickers, I might go for somebody else. However, they should be all right. They have high floors and low ceilings, so to speak. They're not going to have a phenomenal game for you, but they should get you some points. Finally, obviously you have to start Carolina's defense, averaging 14 points a game in the last 3 games, and I would sit Atlanta's defense.
Chiefs versus the Broncos. Well, the coach made the announcement they're going to go ahead and start Paxton Lynch. Looking ahead to next year, see what they've got. They tried earlier in the year. He played part of a game, didn't look good at all, got injured, so he's going to start. Right now, Kansas City doesn't have a whole lot to gain in this game, so they've already said that they're going to sit a lot of their starters, and that could mean they sit some defensive starters, and if they did, that might mean Paxton Lynch would have a better game. His value may go up. With that said, though, he hasn't done enough this year you can trust. You're certainly not going to trust your championship to Paxton Lynch, sit him. Kansas City coaches already came out and said that they're going to sit Alex Smith and start Pat Mahomes. Now, I like Pat Mahomes. Actually, our preseason videos, we said he has the same type of talent we saw in Deshaun Watson. And as you know, Deshaun Watson tore it up for a bit there. This is a guy that is very, very talented. I really love this guy, actually. I think he's got a lot of potential. Concern I have with starting him this week, even though that might be a sexy play, it might look attractive. Denver's solid against the pass. Their defense is playing well. It's his first start. And if Kansas City sits players, they may also sit guys like Kelsey and Hill. Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelsey may get sat in this game to rest him. So it means his first start against a good defense with not a lot of number one weapons around him. Don't even take that chance. Just go ahead and skip him. Let's look at the running backs. Kareem Hunt. Right now he's playing Denver, allowed the 4th fewest points to running backs. So it would seem with Reed's decision in the game to sit Smith, you wonder if that's going to include also sitting Hunt, limiting his carries. But like we previously mentioned in the video, Hunt is also right now in the running for the rushing title. So what's Andy Reid going to do in this one? I tend to feel like he's probably not going to play him much. I think that he'll see the field for maybe 10 carries, maybe a couple catches. I think they'll limit it, and I think they'll end up going with a lot of Chandrick West in this one. So if you play him, I hope you have better options out there for you. There's some concern with starting Hunt this week. I would say he's a running back 3 at this point. Chandrick West is the one that'll probably get most of those carries this week if they sit Hill or if they limit him. Not Hill, but if they limit Hunt. So he's a guy that you can play out there, but even that's a little sketchy. And so here's what I would encourage you to do between now and then. We'll give you the information based on what we have now. The trend that we're looking at with Andy Reid is I anticipate that Hunt's not going to play at all, or if he does, very limited. But watch the news come, let's say, Friday or Saturday, even Sunday morning. Just take a look and see if there's any other comments from the coach that might indicate which direction he's going to go with this whole situation there. As far as the running backs for Denver goes, C.J. Anderson, after a clear-cut running back by committee for many weeks in a row there, he's really kind of become the lead running back again. Over the last 4 weeks, he's averaged 20.75 carries per game. Now he plays Kansas City, who allow the 14th fewest points to running backs. I think Anderson can be trusted as a running back 2 this week. Booker will get some carries in there, but not enough to trust. So I would say start Anderson, sit all the other running backs. As far as wideouts go, you got Tyreek Hill. He plays Denver. Now Denver allows the 2nd fewest points to wide receivers. Aqib Talib is back, and if he does play, he'll end up being the one that faces Hill. So I would sit Hill this week, and that's tough because he's actually played well the last 3 weeks. But I wouldn't trust Tyreek Hill at all, assuming he even plays, which I don't know if he's going to. He's the number 1 wideout. Another thing that complicates that situation, you have a rookie quarterback there, so just stay away from Tyreek Hill. Let's look at I would sit all other Kansas City wideouts. I would sit all other wideouts for Denver except Demaryius Thomas. They played Kansas City, who allowed the 2nd most points to wide receivers. I would start Demaryius Thomas as a wide receiver 3, and this when they got to throw the ball to somebody, I expect he'll be the one getting the targets. And actually, if you look back to the first season that Paxton Lynch played, he played in 3 games, and during those 3 games, Thomas had 2 touchdowns, so he's not afraid to look his way and throw the ball his direction. I would sit Sanders like I had mentioned. As far as tight ends go, this is really tough. I have Travis Kelsey in a number of my leagues this year. He did me really well. He's got a great matchup against Denver, who allowed the 4th most points to tight ends. I expect Travis Kelsey to sit, or he's not getting a lot of play in this game. So the tight end I would roll with that was out there is Demarius Harris. I think he's a great play this week. I think he's sneaky, especially if you're in a daily fantasy league. Last week he had a season high 7 targets. I expect he's going to exceed that this week. I would expect Harris to get close to 10 to 11 targets. I would say Kelsey over Harris, and that's really tough for me to say that, but you got to go the direction the coach is leaning. I would sit all Denver tight ends. I would start Buckner, and I would sit McManus. I would start Denver's defense, but I would sit Kansas City's defense in this one. Even though Kansas City is playing Paxton Lynch, we don't know how many of those Kansas City starters are actually going to play.
All right, now we get to talk about the Jaguars and the Titans. Now, the Jaguars don't have anything to gain from winning or losing this week. It actually makes no difference in their playoff matchup. I believe they cannot earn a bye, and they are going to win their division. However, the coach for the Jaguars said that they will be playing starters and no starters will sit. There's one exception to that, but we will get to that in a little bit. Start off talking about Blake Bortles. I think you have to start Blake Bortles and talk about the last 4 games are the reason why. In the last 4 games, he's had 9 touchdowns and averaging over 300 yards. And, last week we told people to start him against the 49ers, and we had a little scare in the first half. He looked horrible. He barely had 100 yards passing and like a touchdown. It was ugly. But he ended up recovering and getting a couple touchdowns and over 300 yards, so we were fine. I trust him again this week. On the other side, we look at the Titans' defense. In the last 4 games, quarterbacks against them have averaged over 300 yards. One of them, who threw for 308 yards, is Tom Savage. How do you let Tom Savage throw for 300 yards on you? I think if Tom Savage can do it, Bortles can do it. He's on a roll lately. I would sit Marcus Mariota. He has struggled significantly lately. And the Jaguars are one of the best defenses in the NFL. I think that'll be a good matchup for the Jags defense. Moving on to running backs, I think that Derrick Henry is going to be a great start this week. With DeMarco Murray, he's out with an MCL tear, or was it tear, I believe?
MCL strain, I think it was a tear, I'm not sure. MCL injury, nonetheless.
Either way, he will not be playing this week at all. And so for the first time this season, Derrick Henry is going to be the sole back in that offense. He's going to get a lot of carries, and that bulk should lead to some production. On the other side, we talk about Leonard Fournette, running back for the Jaguars. He's the one guy that, although the coach said that he is going to play starters, we have a feeling Fournette will be extremely limited. He has been by far the most banged-up player on that team, especially on that offense. And he has played well. He is a really important key to that offense. Moving the ball and will be extremely crucial in their hopefully playoff success for them. So I wouldn't play Leonard Fournette this week. I think he's going to be really limited. Move on to wide receivers. I think this is going to be a great week to start Keelan Cole. He has looked very, very well lately, and he's playing the Titans, who are the 10th worst pass defense in the NFL. But with 3 touchdowns, averaging over 100 yards a game in the last 4 games, Keelan Cole seems to be a phenomenal option. For the Titans, Rashard Matthew. At best, I'm going to call Rashard Matthew a wide receiver 3. Now, he is still the number 1 receiver in Tennessee, so I have a hard time not starting a number 1 wide receiver. However, it's a good defense, and he hasn't played well lately, so that's kind of...
Yeah, and if Doug Marrone sticks to what he said, where he decides to start all of his starters, that means he's going to face Jalen Ramsey, one of the best cornerbacks in the league.
Yeah, so that'd be a very tough matchup. As far as tight ends go, obviously, I think you have to start Delanie Walker. He's one of the best tight ends this year. It's a thin position we talk about tight ends. There aren't too many tight ends that can score fantasy points. Walker is one of them. Although he's playing one of the best defenses in the NFL, he gets a lot of targets. He's an important part of that offense. I think you'd be dumb to keep him out of your lineup unless for some reason you have, one of the other best tight ends out there. And, one of the few guys who I would say is better than him fantasy-wise is Kelsey, who won't be playing. So, unless you have Gronk, I don't imagine there's going to be anybody that you're going to be smartfully playing over him. I think you have to play him. On the other side, sit any Jags tight ends. As far as kickers go, I would Ryan Suckup. I would say that he's a good start. He's a good kicker with a tough matchup. On the other side, we see Josh Lambo is a good start. He's not quite as good of a kicker as Ryan Suckup, but he has a much better matchup. He plays the Jaguars, who give up the most fantasy points to kickers all year.
Titans, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And then, of course, for defenses, you'd be dumb not to start the Jaguars, and I don't think I would start Tennessee. I think it's a bad matchup. That defense hasn't been very good all year.
San Francisco versus the Rams. So before I get started out there, if any of you listeners are 49er fans, if you're 49er fans out there, we want to hear from you. So what are your thoughts on Jimmy Garoppolo? Are you guys pretty excited right now? Because I got to imagine 49ers Nation is pretty jacked up about the future. It looks like they got themselves their future quarterback here, their franchise quarterback. He looks great. And we'll start right there with Jimmy Garoppolo and quarterbacks in this game. He's a guy that I think you need to start. Now, last week against the best defense in the NFL, the Jags, and we said sit him. We did. And I think a lot of people across fantasy world said sit him, and he went out and he looked great against the best defense in the NFL. Speaking Tuesday now, Coach Sean McVay hinted that the Rams will sit some of their starters, and that may include sitting some of their defensive starters. With that said, that's only going to help Jimmy Garoppolo in this game. If you look at him, if you study his numbers, how he came on, now he missed a lot of time there, but each game he's gotten better and better as he's learned that offense to get his timing down. Jimmy Garoppolo is a good player. Really like him in this one. Once again, like the way he's looked. I'm excited for next year for him. The other one is Jared Goff. Well, Coach came out today and said Jared Goff will not be playing. He's going to be sitting, so right away, that's just off the radar right there. Go ahead and sit him, and don't even worry about the Rams' backup quarterback. It's not even worth taking a shot there. Let's take a look at running backs. Todd Gurley. Well, San Francisco allows the 5th most points to running backs. Coach came out today and said Todd Gurley's going to sit. Guy's been a stud last couple weeks. He carried a lot of people to the championship, or definitely through the championship game, but he is going to sit, so stay away from Todd Gurley. So what that does, it brings up Malcolm Brown. He'll be the running back for the Rams at this point. So he's actually a decent play. I like Malcolm Brown as a running back too in this matchup. Go ahead and start him. Brings us to Carlos Hyde. San Francisco plays the Rams. The Rams allow the 10th most points to running backs at this point. Now, last time Hyde faced them, he had 25 carries for 84 yards and 2 TDs. Now, I think this game is going to see a few less carries, and I think some of those carries end up going to Matt Breida. Now, if you look at Matt Breida, he's had double-digit carries 3 of the last 4 games. Now, if you look back to the beginning of the year, Shanahan actually came out and said he liked Breida, and he felt like Breida was a better fit for this offense than Hyde was. And after the year, Hyde's a free agent. So what I think is going to happen here is I think San Francisco wants to keep that momentum going. I know they love to finish the year with a 5-game winning streak. What a great way, right, to build momentum and excitement for next year. So I think that you take a look at Hyde's going to get, he's still going to get carries, although he struggled this year. Even this year's yards per carry down to 3.8 is a career low. But I think you can expect 15 to 18 carries for Hyde. And then for Breida, I expect maybe 8 to 12 carries and 3 to 4 targets in the passing game. So that's kind of where it's going to shake out in this one. You take that information, put the context of your league. I would probably play Hyde as a running back 2, and I would play Breida as a running back 2 to 3, maybe a flex play.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm tired, if you're just boring. I keep yawning.
Yeah,
it's probably you're just boring.
I'm just boring. Sorry, forgive me. So, let's look at the wideouts here. Roberts Woods. Well, as we told already, Tom McVay said, or Coach McVay said, that a lot of his players are going to be sitting in this one. Sean McVay, sorry. And so I would think that Robert Woods is a prime candidate to sit. He's had a shoulder injury. He's been banged up. He has played through it. He came back a little bit early. He's a guy that's definitely going to sit in this game, so don't start Woods. Cooper Kupp. I think he'll probably get some reps in this game. He's played very well. But without Goff at quarterback, his value drops. He's a wide receiver 4. The one wide receiver I would say there that I would start for the Rams is Sammy Watkins. He's got 8 touchdowns on the year, and he's really been in the pecking order about the 3rd wide receiver behind Woods and behind Cooper Kupp. So I expect him to get a bump in targets this game. I expect him and Tavon Austin to see bigger targets than they normally would. I like Watkins as a wide receiver 3, and I see him leading the team in targets in this game. As far as tight ends go, I would sit the Rams tight ends, and I would start George Kittle. He's starting to build rapport with Jimmy Garoppolo, and so I like George Kittle as a low-end tight end play. Like you said, there's not a lot of tight ends you can trust, especially Week 17 right now. I would start kicker Gould. I would sit, I think his name is Ficken, the kicker for the Rams. I know they've got to be missing Greg Zernline at this point. And I would sit both defenses in this game.
All right, now we get to talk about obviously the most exciting game of the year, Bills-Dolphins. This is going to be a total crapshoot. We'll get in with those quarterbacks. I would sit both Jay Cutler and Tyrod Taylor. They have both struggled tremendously all season long. Now, Tyrod Taylor has just been straight up bad. We've seen a few shining moments from Cutler, a couple games here and there that are good. However, it doesn't matter. We can't expect one of those games. They're playing Buffalo as the 4th best pass defense in the NFL. So I imagine both those quarterbacks are going to get solidly shut down. We'll move on pretty fast there. Move on to the running backs. Kenyon Drake. I think Kenyon Drake is a must start. He has played so well. He's one of the few guys in the NFL, as a slowly turning the NFL into every team being these running back by committees. Drake is the sole guy there, and he's played extremely well. Plus, he's playing the Bills, who are the worst run defense in the NFL. So I think that's a must start. I'm excited to see what he can do this week. On the other side, we see LaShawn McCoy. The last 6 games, McCoy has been phenomenal, scoring 94 points, fantasy points, in 6 games in standard leagues. And the Dolphins give up the 5th most fantasy points to running backs. So that's another match that I think is going to be great. Should be 2 awesome ground games this week. As far as wide receivers, the only wide receiver I would say that you could be confident in this week in this game is Jarvis Landry. Despite how tough the Bills' pass defense is, Landry has been very good this season with 8 touchdowns and 103 receptions. He's a must-play. The ball has got to go somewhere in that passing game. Of course, I would sit all Buffalo wide receivers. I don't know if you're around at this point. I don't know if I need to tell you why. You just look at their numbers all season and you'll understand why. As always, nobody trusts them. I would sit tight ends for both teams. Charles Clay for the Bills is questionable and hasn't played well all season. Kind of the same situation with the Dolphins, who just don't have a good tight end. Kickers, I would start kicker Cody Parquet. The Bills give up the 7th most fantasy points to kickers. In the last 3 games, Parquet has averaged 9.5 points a game. So he's a solid, not great, but a solid start at kicker this week. I would start Buffalo's defense and sit Miami's.
The Raiders versus the Chargers in this one. Let's start with Phillip Rivers. So he's a one solid veteran quarterback out there that we know has to play and needs to play well. This is a must-win situation for the Chargers. So go ahead and start Phillip Rivers in a good matchup here. Let's look at Derek Carr. Derek Carr struggled a lot at times this season for a lot of reasons. I know he had that back injury, and we know Amari Cooper was out, and there's a lot of reasons why he struggled. I actually like Derek Carr as a quarterback long term. I think going into this year, he was somebody I was very high on, but he has struggled. Now he plays the Chargers, allow the 4th fewest points to quarterbacks, so you need to sit Carr. And you consider, once again, like I said, the Chargers, they need to win, so they're going to be bringing it all, and they're going to be coming to play ball there, so I would sit Derek Carr. As far as running backs go, you got Melvin Gordon. Now, Coach Anthony Lynn calls Gordon day-to-day. Said the decision probably won't be made till Friday whether or not he plays, so you're going to have to watch that closely. Like I previously mentioned, the Chargers need to win, and Austin Eckler is dealing with a wrist injury, so I think they're going to do everything they can to get Gordon in this game. They're going to need him to play, and if he starts, you need to start Gordon in this one. Otherwise, they're going to turn to Oliver. Brendan Oliver is a running back. And if Brendan Oliver becomes a running back, I don't think Oliver's going to get a majority of the carries. If Gordon can't go, I think you're going to see a running back by committee, and they'll devalue all the other running backs, so I would stay away from them. Marshawn Lynch, since week 7, he's been running tough again. He's been running physical. His yards per carry have been going up. He's starting to run like the beast mode that we saw many years ago in Seattle. I expect him to see 15 to 20 carries in this one, so I would start him. I would sit Washington and Richard in this game. As far as wideouts go, Keenan Allen, you need to start him. He's a must start. He's been great all year. He's in a very good matchup and a must-win game. Let's look at Amari Cooper. Now, he did come back last week. Amari Cooper came back at 3 catches, 66 yards in the TD. Now he plays the Chargers, allow the 6th fewest points to wide receivers. And if he ends up playing, he's going to see Casey Hayward, who's a very, very good corner. Last time Cooper played them, he was very quiet. So I would say Amari Cooper's a wide receiver 3. You could play him, but his value is a lot lower. Jack Del Rio said Michael Crabtree injured his hamstring in week 16, so he's questionable. I would probably say to sit Crabtree at this one. As far as tight ends go, I would start Antonio Gates. Right now, he plays the defense, allows the 7th most points to tight ends. Henry went into IR, and this probably could be the last game for Gates. If they don't make the postseason, he could be retiring. Last week, he had a good line of 6 catches, 81 yards, and a TD. I would start him, and I would sit Cooks in this game. As far as kickers go, I would sit Tavecchio, and I would sit Rose. I would sit Oakland's defense, but this is a must-start. You got to start that Chargers defense in this one. They could have a huge game.
Seahawks, Cardinals, we'll get right into it with the quarterbacks. As always, we'll start. Blaine Gabbert is an obvious sit. In the last 5 games, he's had 6 interceptions, and playing Seattle this week, the 8th toughest pass defense in the NFL. Obviously, I wouldn't trust him in any fantasy game, let alone a championship or a playoff game. On the other side, we see Russell Wilson, who is quite the opposite. He is a must start. He's had at least 1 touchdown in every game this year except for week 1. That is consistency. I mean, he is playing so well. He has 32 passing touchdowns on the season. That doesn't even include any times he's ran it in the end zone. You got to start Russell Wilson. We look at Kerwin Williams. I would sit Kerwin Williams. He has a bad matchup. He is questionable, and he's just been all right. I mean, you look at, he is the 3rd running back. It began the year with David Johnson. They were excited about him. He got hurt. They brought in Peterson. Peterson played okay, and he got hurt. And now they're just kind of playing Kerwin Williams because they have no choice, not because he's an impressive back. On the other side for Seattle, we look at Mike Davis. I would sit him as well. We were excited about him coming out, and I think he's played all right. I think he's still probably the best running back for Seattle, but he hasn't been great, and the Cardinals get the 5th fewest fantasy points to running back, so I don't think that's a lovely matchup for him to do too much. So we'll just keep moving on now to the wide receivers. Larry Fitzgerald, I think you have to start him as a wide receiver 2 or 3. He has 1,100 receiving yards on the season. He is the main option there. I mean, he is Larry Fitzgerald, the guy who's in Hall of Fame discussion, so we know he's got the talent. His quarterback situation isn't great, but the ball has got to go somewhere, as I like to say. There's always got to be one receiver and one guy in the team to do a little something, even if they get shut out. Somebody's got to get some yards. Talking about Doug Baldwin, I think you have to start Doug Baldwin as a wide receiver 3. Although he has a tough matchup and hasn't been as good as many people would like, he is still Russell Wilson's favorite option. He's still been all right, and like I said, he has had some struggles, but don't let that kind of burn bias get you. He's not a bad wide receiver. Of course, tight ends, you have to start Jimmy Graham. While Jimmy Graham is questionable, and I would keep watching it to see at the last minute whether or not he plays, he should play, and he's had 11 touchdowns in the past 10 games. You can't get a better play at that at tight end. He's not great. He doesn't get a lot of catches. He doesn't get a lot of yards, but he's a huge red zone target, and you're not going to find a better option if he plays. Obviously, I would sit any Arizona tight end. I'm not sure that they have anyone there that we like at all for now or for the future. I would sit both kickers, especially Walsh. Walsh is just bad kicker. He's just missed a lot of field goals this year, and I don't think they trust him or want to kick too much. I would start Seattle's defense, and I would sit Arizona's.
Saints versus the Buccaneers. So let's take a look at quarterback Drew Brees. Well, Drew Brees and the Saints can clinch the division in a home playoff game with a win. So they have incentive to go out there, play well, play their starters. So I would start Drew Brees, who plays Tampa Bay. That allow the 14th most points to quarterbacks. Now, as far as Jameis Winston goes in this game, I would also start Jameis Winston. Plays New Orleans, allow the 12th fewest points to quarterbacks. The Saints defense has actually been pretty tough right now to the past. But here's the thing. Winston over the last 4 games has averaged over 300 yards and over 20 fantasy points 3 of the last 4 games. So Winston's played decent. He's not what I would call maybe not a great quarterback per se, but he is a quality fantasy football quarterback. A lot of times they're playing from behind. Their defense isn't very good. So I like Jameis Winston, this one with a lot of garbage time statistics. Go ahead and feel comfortable starting him. As far as running backs in this go, Peyton Barber plays New Orleans, allow the 14th fewest points to running backs. During that stretch where he's taken over as number 1 running back, his yards per carry have been a healthy 4.37. He's using the passing game. He's a big back who gets goal line carries. In fact, he's averaged 15.25 carries in the last 4 games. I would start Peyton Barber in this one. And then, of course, you look at Mark Ingram and Kamara. They have a great matchup versus Tampa Bay that allow the 9th most points to running backs. You need to start those guys. They've been great all year long. They need to win the game. The Saints want to lock up a home playoff game in the division, so start both running backs there. As far as the wideouts go, I would start Mike Evans. He's got back on track after last 2 weeks. He's played well after being kind of off track for a while there, but he's back on track. Go ahead and start Mike Evans as a wide receiver 1. And then I would start Michael Thomas as a wide receiver 1, playing Tampa Bay, who allows the most points to wide receivers. You got to start Michael Thompson. And I would also start Ted Ginn in this one. He's worth a wide receiver 3 play in this game, a game they need to win against a terrible pass defense. As far as tight ends go, I would sit all tight ends in this game for both teams. I would start Lutz. I would sit sit Murray. And I would sit Tampa Bay's defense, but I would start New Orleans' defense in this one.
Ravens, Bengals. We'll start off talking about Joe Flacco. If you're absolutely desperate, sure, you can start Joe Flacco. I wouldn't necessarily be comfortable about it, but he's played better lately. He's got 7 touchdowns in the past 4 games. However, he hasn't thrown for over 300 yards all season. I do think that they need a win this week, if I'm not mistaken, to get in playoffs. If they lose, I think they could miss. However, either way, I think they're going to be playing all their starters. Andy Dalton is a sit. Ravens give up the 2nd fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, and Andy Dalton has just been bad all year anyway, so that's a very obvious sit. Look at it this week. I believe Joe Mixon won't play, correct?
Sounds like he's going to be out, yes.
Yep, okay. We can never really be certain about that, but I feel pretty confident. One of the few times I feel confident that he will not play. So I would start Giovanni Bernard since Mixon's since his injury, Bernard has played very, very well since then. So I think even though Ravens have a good defense, I think Bernard should have a fairly good week this week. As far as running backs for the Ravens, Alex Collins, he should be a good RB2 or 3. Cincinnati is the third worst run defense in the NFL, and Alex Collins has 5 touchdowns in the last 6 games, so I like Collins this week as well. Looking at the wide receivers, I would sit all Ravens tight ends. None of them have been very impressive all year. I know a lot of people are tempted to start maybe Mike Wallace, or, I know a few people who are to start. People might put Michael Campanaro because he got a touchdown last week, but you just don't know where the ball is going to go, and that offense is really still just not very impressive, especially in the passing game. A.J. Green for the Cincinnati Bengals, I don't trust him, especially against that tough Ravens D. However, he still has over 1,000 yards on the year and 8 touchdowns. He's too good not to play, but I definitely wouldn't expect that much from him. I don't think he's a wide receiver 1, maybe a wide receiver 2 or 3. As far as tight ends, I would sit all tight ends in this game. It's not a tight end friendly matchup. Of course, you got to start kicker Justin Tucker. He's one of the best in the NFL. He has been for years, and they love using him, especially with that defense. They're fine winning game off of his leg. I would sit the Bengals kicker, and I would start the Ravens defense, of course, and I wouldn't start the Bengals defense.
All right. So that's it for us. For those that have a Week 17 championship, good luck. We wish you the best. Stay tuned to our contest. It's free. It's fun. We'd love to play against you guys. Chance to win a free T-shirt. Stay subscribed. Like I said, in the offseason, we have a lot of things to you. Thank you once again for joining us here at the FFP. God bless and have a good night.